This podcast was recorded on May 3rd, 2020. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and people outside the binary. This is Less Stupid with Thomas Hiura, a show that's completely uncut, uncensored, and unopposed to the idea of sitting down with fellow mayoral candidates here in the May 19th primary in Eugene, Oregon. And one of those is the wonderful Zondie Zinke, who is a mother, an activist, a writer, and a person who I am so glad to be running alongside. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit, Zondie?
Nope, that was great, but I guess I can say, yes, I'm a candidate for mayor, and I'm running on the Solidarity platform. And I'll probably mention this at the end of the show, but you can look it up at solidarityplatformeugene.org. And just that I'm so happy, I'm so proud to be running with all 6 non-incumbent mayoral candidates. When I say running with, Thomas Hiura is not part of the, you can clarify that,
sure.
The Solidarity platform, but...
Don't associate me with this radical stuff.
No. But I am seriously proud of every single one of the 6 candidates, and I stand by them, and I support you voting for any one of the non-incumbent mayoral candidates.
Well, that's something that I really appreciate because, have you followed Albert Lee's congressional campaign at all up in Portland?
No.
So he's a really cool sort of outsider candidate, and he is endorsed by brand new Congress, just like Doyle Canning, and he talks about how democracy requires choice. And it's when you get into the establishment two-party politics, they are so often convinced that if you have someone who's a Democrat, everything's good. Don't challenge them. That seat is filled. Let's focus on flipping Republican seats because Republicans are the enemies. And then the Republicans play the same games. It's like demonize all the Democrats. And that's not the reality of life. Having a D or an R next to your name doesn't automatically mean that everything you're doing is productive or terrible. Right. I wanted to ask you to... the first question I ask everybody on the show is, what is a controversial opinion that you have about anything?
Sure. And this one's a little tricky for me to talk about because I think I've discovered that it's controversial sort of in a rather passive way, which is that, as I began in this campaign to speak out more about what I think needs to happen on climate change, I feel that surely what needs to happen is, well, I shouldn't say surely, I'm nearly sure that what needs to happen is some level of mandatory behavior change. And so the way I've been framing that as in my campaign is that we need to aggressively take on pilots around climate change, voluntary pilots, and if those voluntary actions prove inadequate, then in short order, we need to switch that to mandatory pilots.
You're talking about pilot programs, right?
Yeah.
All right. Though airline pilots also do contribute a little bit.
Airline pilots probably need to be grounded a lot more than they are. So with that, I can explain, you really need many heads behind that. But the reason that I am saying it's controversial is I realize I don't hear this said at all. And I feel like it's a new thing coming out of my mouth. And I'm in touch with, high-level climate activists, and They don't have it on their list of suggestions. And I don't know if that's because it's not needed. There are solutions without any mandates. When I say mandates on the populace at large, or at least on select consumption levels. So I don't know if it's not needed, and that's great if it's not, but it's hard for me to believe, or if it's because climate activists and organizations don't want to alienate either the public at large from what is the common cause, or alienate the government and power bodies that they need to be acting in concert. They need to invite the government bodies to act in concert with them. So, and of course, for anybody holding political office, that's a possibly political suicide to be mentioning mandates. I'm hoping that will, if it is needed, that will change rapidly.
Right on. Well, liberty is such a deeply like American constitutional thing. And so, I would say that one of the things that sets me a little bit apart is that I'm, not fully anti-capitalist. I see virtues in competition and in capitalism that's maybe more human-centered, not this totally unfettered, unregulated. Wall Street can speculate and do whatever they want with our money, blah, blah, blah. So that's something that's true for me. But, we have to recognize that if there is a totally anarcho-capitalist, like, no rules, no holds barred, that people are going to do things that are destructive to the planet, especially because as human beings, we evolved in a way that makes us most sensitive to threats that look the most urgent. If I got up here and broke this 6-foot boundary between you and I was going to throw a punch at you, you would probably do something about that. Yeah. But with the carbon having reached 415 parts per million in the atmosphere, that's not something that looks like the kind of thing evolutionarily that we would have thought of as a threat. But if anybody's allowed to do anything, then you're a mother. Your children, their children, my grandchildren potentially that I hope will exist and be really awesome, are going to suffer.
Yeah. And I just want to underscore something. When I just heard Thomas break down, this idea of why we are not responding as we need to around climate change and how we are not evolutionarily adapted to abstract threat like that.
Yeah.
I just appreciate so much him as a candidate saying these necessary things around climate, really insightful things around climate change and climate response, which I'm afraid that our current leadership, she does not do it at all.
Well, you mentioned that I have a bunch of hats, and you mentioned that I looked like an egomaniac at first, but now you don't experience me in that way. Thank you. You can, though. It's fine. People have experienced me in that way, and I'm okay with it. I'm just like no holds barred, proud. My name's on my car. Yeah, but I had a hat that said HATT, hat. And it stood for humanity and tough truths. It was supposed to be like my much better, like the inverse of MAGA. And that's something I really felt, as a person who supported Andrew Yang a lot. He talks about humanity first. And now he has an organization called Humanity Forward. But humanity and tough truths. Humanity is something we see people on the left, spearheading a lot and saying, let's care for the people who are the most marginalized and in the most need of resources. And then I think, people around here in Lane County who are more conservative are often willing to speak the tough truths, are often willing to criticize our Democrats who have had power in this region since like the 80s and are still leading us sometimes off a cliff. So I want to be able to bring in both of those things. And I've been really appreciative that, I started this campaign for mayor in August. And it's been great to watch like other people come in and be like, I don't know if recognizing the same sorts of things I've recognized or being able to just put themselves forward in a way that says, we're not just going to settle for, what we have because, Matthew Yuke talks about our current mayor having been sort of anointed, and
Yeah.
Typically it's like people, the establishment likes to bring people who have like, hey, this person was a city councilor and was a state rep and a state senator and have these electoral experiences. And then they were kind of like, nah, we don't need to do that this time. And so that's one of the biggest things I've seen is sort of a competence deficit. There's an honesty and a truthfulness deficit, but there's also a deficit of, when you elect somebody who doesn't seem to have any of the, nonprofit and fundraising experience is relevant to like campaigning, and having relationships is good. But that to me has been an issue. So I want to ask you, what do you think qualifies you in this run? I know it's not like a egocentric run that you're doing to say, I am the best person in Eugene to be the mayor. It's a lot more like, hey, this is what we got to fucking do to put stronger leadership that really represents the people of Eugene. And so what makes you, run for mayor?
Yeah. Well, I can say that I've been, if anyone knows David Zupan from Progressive Voices and KEPW and Peaceworks, he sent out an email this morning sort of and in which he said that she is something that I'm a fierce watchdog of local governmental action. And so I think one of my strengths is that I have been able to really watch, just in terms of the structure of my life, I've had access to watching nearly every city council meeting, every public forum, etc. And so I have a lot of information, and when you've been tracking something so closely for 4 years, longer too, but you're just not going to be duped. You've seen it. You've seen how it happens. So I think that's one of my strengths. But I want to say that I have been so humbled because I thought, one reason I am running is because I thought, I do stand out a little bit among so many people that I share values with, in that I'm like, really watch the process and call out the process, and I don't, extend trust where it's not due. But
true.
But when I say I'm really humbled, I see so much with people organizing around the Solidarity platform. Every person has so much to offer, and even where I felt like, at some point I decided, okay, there's not going to be any vetting process here. Everybody should be encouraged to be democratically engaged, or engaged in this process. And maybe I had some hesitations about how's this person going to come across. I have all that about myself too all the time, believe me. But I am so humbled because I feel, when you face your own biases, it's finally an enriching thing, and you realize, God, what a fool to, I don't have to go too far with it, but
it's a podcast. Go as far as you want.
Okay, and I really just feel like people. I understand that so many people can do this job so well,
yes.
But it is not the people, I think, who are inclined, first of all, to run. Hopefully that's changing, because it is status quo establishment thinkers who are inclined to run, and who would have the machinery behind them to get elected. And there is it's not that there's no values in in being a sort of establishment thinker. Establishment thinkers tend to be calm and orderly, but there's also limits.
This might not be the time to be the most calm, orderly. Let's make an ad hoc committee for every decision. It's like, let's have some urgency and bring something, to the table. It's honestly amazing to think that after 3.7 years of being the mayor, like having basically no accomplishments is worth reelecting. Like it shows, I think, such an arrogance about, like, it's not necessary that I have accomplishments on the ground. It's like the word frameworks gets brought up a lot. It's like, next term I'm really gonna see these changes on the ground happening with affordable housing, with the riverfront properties, and it's like, why are you just assuming that the people are going to elect you again when none of this, they're looking around, they're like, homelessness is getting worse. The climate plan, the 2020 goals have not been met at all. What's going on with our education system, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And at the same time, she's not likely to, she's not, too far off in assuming that so much of the political establishment structure, where you just get endorsements, that are pretty mindlessly given, or, because there's this viability threshold, it kind of revolts me that, I don't mean that to put that, I was going to say it kind of revolts me that none of us have the endorsement from, for example, Sunrise. I don't mean to put that on them. I completely understand their new organization in town.
I think they wanted to endorse me, but I didn't turn in the form quite quick enough. So that was part of it for me.
Yeah, that's very possible.
There were a lot of forms.
Yeah, there were. But
they also did not endorse the incumbent.
No, they did not endorse
anybody in the race.
But I and I have some interest in some, in my wildest dreams, they would come out with a late endorsement of anyone but the incumbent, to see that we were all to the left of her. We were all much stronger on climate change than she is. But in any case, my point is not to harp on them, because I completely understand where they were coming from, looking at viability issues and being a fledgling organization locally. But, same for 350 pack, which is also new this year. So to not be able to, when you have obvious distinctions, but really I feel like we have a hobbled campaign. I have a hobbled campaign. And so I understand, I don't know that I even want to try too hard to convince organizations or individuals to endorse me when I don't think there's it's the best shot of breaking through to the primary is if for any of us is if we are able to have people pause over this message that Lucy Vinnie's is the progressive choice, which is actually quite a joke. But
I mean, okay, if she was just saying progressive, I wouldn't be as perturbed. But the progressive choice, which. Okay, let's talk a little about sustainability. That was her yard sign in 2016, and now they're reusing a lot of the signs, but they've also been reusing a lot of the digital graphics, which could be easily changed.
Yes.
So when you're trying to set yourself apart from a 10-year city councilor who's the most right-leaning Republican city councilor in our city, then I can understand that was the case then. But run a campaign that's relevant to now and that's honest about what's happening now. And you've been very clear about the fact that she is... to the right of everybody. It's not just that we are to the left of her. It's that she is to the right of everybody in the race, but has the infrastructure I'm sure people are text banking and phone banking probably right now, to try to get the vote out. But I genuinely believe that, and this relates a little bit to what you're saying about endorsements, a person's record is paramount. What they've actually done and who they've actually been is... You can't dump six-figure money on someone and say that they're progressive or that they and erase the fact that the elected city auditor position that would have brought some democratic accountability into what happens at city council meetings was shut down in part by Mayor Venice. So to respond a little bit too, because hopefully one of us or any of the six of us will be on the ballot in November, and then people will be like, how the fuck did that happen? And they'll be looking at these old videos and watching. So I want to say my philosophy with endorsements, especially with Sunrise and just with endorsements in general, was that I do see the limitations, especially like you look at Ward 2. Matt Keating versus, I don't try not to name names sometimes, but Matt Keating versus Kate Davidson. I actually like both those people, but I think that, Matt tried to file in Ward 8 before he moved into Ward 2 to run for there, and then has been pumping up like, oh, I've been a 97405 resident for a long time. It's like, that's not how the voting happens, dude. But, it's practically a congressional campaign he's running when you look at all the endorsements and all the people that lined up behind him. And it's been very transparent if you actually have your ear to the ground. And you and I are probably in the top 0.1% of people who have their ears most to the ground about this race, which makes sense. But, come on. Matt encouraged Lucy to run. In 2015, I think, and really helped out. And she basically said, if there's somebody that can help me with the campaign, it's Matt Keating. And so even though Kate Davidson has been in the ward for 18 years, has immense progressive credentials, it's favoritism, it's favors. And, he's got operatives on a lot of these endorsement committees. So somewhat, arrogantly, I believed that I'm going to be able to do this. I'm going to be able to cut through and just talk about my record and talk about my years of policymaking experience and what I've actually accomplished with passing policy on multiple campuses, et cetera. And I'll be able to get into that number 2 spot, and we'll see now. But that was a little bit of my ego coming in and being like, I'm not going to take the endorsement process as seriously as I could have. Because it is discouraging sometimes when you know that you have the values and the policies, and it's just going to go to, Adam Smith anyway. I don't know why I brought up.
Yeah, it's true. Adam
the
Smith.
Conventional, the most like shiny, easy to put up on a poster kind of person. I would even say, my yard sign philosophy has been, okay, I'm probably going to need them in the general, but it's basically single-use plastics. Like if the city's gonna, if the city is going to, ban single-use plastics for, Chiba Hut where I used to work and restaurants and people who are doing food service work, but they're going to be so encouraging of like, hey, here's this yard sign that you can only put up between this very specific period of a very specific year, and there's all these regulations on it. and it's a vanity thing. It's very much about putting yourself up there and out there.
It's not educational.
No,
it's
it's very rarely that people, I like signs that say, like no human being is illegal and like actually have like a message, but it's you're totally right. It's very, it's often too, it's like, oh, okay, I'm a Democrat for city council. It's like, that's your attempt at telling people what you stand for because you know that in your area, it's beneficial to say you're a Democrat in a nonpartisan race. I've been talking for a while. I'll just give you the floor.
Well, I was going to say that at some point in this podcast, I would love to hear some about the policies you got passed on campuses, et cetera, because I actually don't know that much, and it would be great to turn the tables a little bit.
I haven't talked about it much.
Yeah, but everyone should know.
Sure. Well, one of the biggest things was medical amnesty policy for people who were experiencing, like, they had to make a 911 call because somebody was having like a bad reaction to like a psychedelic drug or something. And our policy that we passed in the Carleton Student Association Senate in 2014 or 15 gave medical amnesty to those people, so they would actually have the, if somebody is in a life or death situation, or they're an underage, the bigger thing was an underage drinking situation, they might be able to, before our policy, they might be able to be punished within the school's policy, even if they weren't punished legally for having participated in underage drinking. You're gonna suspend a 20-and-a-half-year-old kid, who's doing great in school because, they were underage drinking or something. It's absurd. So that's one of them. I fought also very strongly for trying to get the college to divest from their endowment from fossil fuels. So that was another big thing. But then, government too, like one of the reasons why I think that like I'm suited for local government is because there's a lot of tedium and a lot of like, there is a learning curve, and you end up like bickering over small things, which is fine. That's kind of what we elect people to do, is make those decisions for us that we don't put on the ballot. So like student publications, right? We would fund, as the Carleton Student Association, publications, and we would try to be fair across publications. But then there was like the Carleton Business Review, that was this economic publication, and they're like, we need to have color printing for all of our pages because our graphs are our economic graphs just depend on it. And then I like brought a edition to the meeting, and I was like, yo, you guys took the arts publication and the music publication, all these people, and said they had to print in black and white. Look at these people who have one red border around their pages, and they're demanding that they get the color printing. So those are a couple of the things. And I ran unsuccessfully for student body president on a platform of, inclusion and equity and diversity. But thankfully, the person who ran against me was, she ended up being the first person of color to hold that office for the near future anyway. So it was really cool. And she did an outstanding job. So I had 4 years of experience there. And yeah, just... tons of fun, but I don't blame anybody because I as much as I do like to put myself out there with music and stuff, I'm also anxious about putting myself out there sometimes too, and anxious about talking about myself. But I want the people to know you as a person too. I know you're a mother, and I've gotten to know you recently, but we don't know each other that well. And take the mayoral race out of the equation. Like what do you love about Eugene, and tell us about who you are.
This is funny. It's sort of an outdated question for me since my younger daughter stopped breastfeeding, I guess just 4 years ago. But it's, if people ask me why I love Eugene, this is always what comes to my mind, is that because I moved here when my older daughter was just 1 year old, and I just felt like I was surrounded by women who breastfed in public, and when I breastfed in the Amazon pool, I had women come up to me and say, "Thank you for breastfeeding in the pool."
That's such an unexpected reaction. You see all these stories go viral of people being like, "That's disgusting. A human breast is disgusting." Wish people could see how disgusted I am at that statement. Anyway, that's great.
Yeah, and so that's really just it really sticks.
Absolutely. So I know that your mother went to Barnard College, which was one block away from where I went to grad school in New York City, on the Columbia campus. And So you're from New York, is that correct?
I am, yeah.
Cool. How did you end up? How did your journey to Eugene end up taking place?
Well, really, to go to grad school for creative writing at the UO.
Nice.
Really, my partner more than myself wanted to move to Oregon, and so he encouraged me to apply to that program. And I had absolutely wonderful mentors there, all of whom are no longer there. But that's what brought me to Eugene. Mm-hmm.
Okay, right on. And I don't know, what do you think about so we're sitting in the Wayne Morse Free Speech Plaza now, which is part of the Lane County government. Let me ask you about, because if you run for mayor, you have to be able to take on all the tough questions, right? We don't have a goddamn city hall. Mm-hmm. We do not have a city hall, and we haven't had one since I think 2013 or something. Do you feel like you have a plan, or how would you get us out of the county building? Because it's good as a stopgap solution, but it's not a long-term thing. And/or what do you think about the Park Blocks project and the progress that the city's been doing there, and how would you move it forward?
Sure. I wouldn't move it forward. I think that there is just no possibility that given the crises that we're facing, both with the economic crises brought on by the pandemic and the climate crises and related economic crises. Well, I should say, not the related economic crises, not in relationship to climate change. We need economic transformation in relationship to climate change.
Sure.
And that transformation will mean that we cannot be building edifices that glorify government prior to actually doing what we need to prevent is a broad stroke, but mitigate climate catastrophe and prepare for climate catastrophe. So we do not need to be restructuring our town square and building a city hall right now. We have the highest per capita number of unsheltered people in the country. So we cannot be routing funds in that direction. And I will just love for those things to be struck until we are people have their bottom line met, and we are actually really prepared for what climate change will bring.
That's awesome. Well, I think that you've talked about regenerative economics as well as part of your platform, which is a wonderful term. I had to look it up, I have to be honest, but we all have dictionaries in our pockets now. Most of us do, I should say. Many of us do. So it's a great landscape to be able to use terminology that might be considered previously to be esoteric. Look that one up too. No, I'm talking down to my audience. They know what esoteric means. But the reason I bring up regenerative economics is because, first of all, I think that you, as mayor, would do a tremendous job of being outspoken and using your bully pulpit, using the role that you have as the mayor of Eugene, Oregon, the third or second biggest city in the best state in what I think is the best country in the world. Yeah. So you would be. That's what I think.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm an immigrant, so that's okay, it's a little bit of a different kind of take on things. But the reason I mention that is because the economic structures that we are all subject to as, little peon Eugenians are definitely informed by city council policy on some level, but I think that we're kind of subject to bigger structures than that. The federal government, for example. So as mayor, how do you think that you would, advocate for federal policies? Kitty Piercy did that quite a bit and worked alongside, the Oregon senators, Wyden Merkley, and then Congressperson DeFazio, who I'm hoping will be replaced by Canning. You become mayor, you get their phone number, you call them up. What are you saying to, Senator Merkley? What are you trying to do as mayor of Eugene to push for Eugenians to feel like their government fucking cares about them?
Yeah. So first I'll say that the number one priority, I think, for myself as mayor, as I think it should be, would be addressing climate change. And this affects every other, realm that needs to be addressed. Systemic racism, it touches on that. the vast income and wealth inequality, impoverishment, it touches on that, et cetera. Economic development touches on that.
Sure.
So what I would do, I mean, I see, I've watched some of the Conference of Mayors. You can watch it on C-SPAN. And, I suppose as a mayor, I would have opportunity to go to that. But
as I've gotten older, I tolerate C-SPAN so much more.
Yes,
as a kid, I'm like, where's the action? And then now I'm like, this stupid action is breaking apart and cutting things up into sound bites.
Exactly. My partner makes fun of me for like watching C-SPAN so much.
Yeah.
So what I would do is actually something that maybe the model for it is something like AOC does, but not. I don't know that I would, in joining the Conference of Mayors, I don't see that that's where I could be potent. I see organizing with, for example, mayors of other cities or any organizers who are really interested in cities becoming real models for how to address climate catastrophe and scaffolding from the local level on up. Because if you get for one city, then you can get two cities, because then if one city does it, the people in another city start demanding that model, and then it spreads. And then if you have 5 cities, you have some leverage power, in relationship to corporations, in relationship to government policy, and it grows. So I would not be putting my energies, it's sort of wasting my energies on sort of status quo structures or people that, if I learn that there's usefulness to it and that it's possible to be efficacious in that route, then I would do it. But really, I would be looking to for new organizing structures.
I think that's brilliant. Let's talk about what it means to advocate for or hold space for decolonization.
Sure.
There was a person who was on the Solidarity Platform, Eugene's Facebook page, and they were it's so funny because they had this criticism and they were like, this is such a PC, politically correct, platform, this is going to run Eugene into the ground, or whatever they were saying. And they said, this specific person said the colonial period was 100 years ago, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that's not even an accurate number as a historian, but the colonial period is what we're still in now. I mean, I had a great teacher who talked about how the Civil War never ended, and I agree. I mean, Reconstruction happened, but the cultural fissures are still deeply a part of our society. Here in Oregon, it's like totally okay to just think that a stupid person kind of talks like this, and that's like anti-Southern bias. So my point is that that's not how history works. Is like, end, chapter ends, so that period is over. But I guess to go into more about this comment, because I'm so petty about it, is that they said that you guys are being politically correct and that you talked about decolonization. To me, talking about decolonization, I don't use that word on my platform, in part because that is not politically correct. It does give you that, it erases what is seen as viability, and it makes you look like an idealist. But what is your response to that? Because I do support, decolonizing our minds and our societies and the structures that do continue to perpetuate the kind of BS that they were built to perpetuate. So what does decolonization mean to you?
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. Mainstream media has not been interested.
No.
So I will say, first of all, there's many agendas of decolonization, and to the degree that I talk about or give examples in any one area, I don't mean to dismiss any others or preclude possibilities in broader or more specific ways. I think that, obviously decolonization can most obviously relate to imperialist retreat, right? But and that's the broadest application.
Are you talking like foreign policy, like getting out of places where we continue to...
Right, so that's where the term decolonizing came. It's a flip of colonizing, right?
Right.
But then I don't know of anyone who is literally talking about in the U.S. about colonial ancestry retreating, but if those voices are out there, then they should be heard. So that's, but I guess I bring that up because I think decolonization can either seem, it can be so alienating to people either because it seems like such a broad impossibility because people's minds go to what I just described. And the reason I think that people aren't talking about that is that we are actually deeply all sensitive to, when people put roots down somewhere, then that really is something that is so inherently valuable that we all relate to it. So now we know that people had roots here that, so we need to consider the people who have been displaced and how to do that without then displacing the people who are ancestors of the people that displaced them, et cetera. That's a whole very broad, complicated thing that deserves real discussion.
Yes.
I want to just give an example of a very specific example of something that Eugene could do in that regard. And just before I do that, I just want to talk about other applications of decolonizing. So if we consider the medical industry, right, women's bodies were in a sense further colonized when we were told to lay on our backs and be what's like when you get an epidural and sort of have your body shut down and a doctor do all that natural process and suddenly it costs $8,000, whereas it's actually pretty possible to squat and do it for free. Wow. But in most cases, obviously there's value in Western medicine that is sometimes very necessary, but
God, I'm
it's
a big
clearly
skeptic
gone
of Western
too far.
medicine, though. The status quo of gosh, this predatory private privatized health industry is wow, you guys are a million degrees away from making a person feel better and heal.
Exactly. And so just in that, that's one example where we can decolonize our minds. In fact, both my children were water births. I had never even heard of water birthing. And at first I thought, oh my God, no, I'll be killing my babies upon birth. So there's so many realms in which this is applicable. But let me talk about, government policy in the city of Eugene. So the city of Eugene is currently poised to gift away the retired steam plant building to the same developers who tried to steal Kesey Square. And they're planning to gift the building and some of the land around the steam plant to these developers and throw in $4 million with it. How that $4 million came up is that after the developers who the city began negotiations with to transfer ownership to them were selected from just among 4 different developer groups. Then afterwards they came back and said, actually to kind of do what we want to do, we would need $4 million. And so, that is a little bit gross to me as part of the process. But the thing is, when I think about this, there's the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, as just an example, who represent people who are displaced from Eugene, right? They are actively acquisitioning land and doing, some awesome things with it, such as building cultural centers so that there's elsewhere in Oregon, I'm forgetting right now where it is, and I mean to visit it, but the British Museum just loaned artifacts that they had stolen, now they're loaning them back to
Isn't that funny, loaning them back?
Yeah, loaning them back. So, wow. And then it's so cool because that museum exhibit here, then people began to learn more of their own ancestry, how things were made, how things were done. But anyway, then in, I believe it's Oregon City, right on the river, they have they just acquisitioned a retired mill, and they are investing $36 million in a renovation for it. To make it another cultural center. So the thing is, Eugene, in relationship to decolonizing, could have considered I actually don't promote public-private partnerships, and which is, actually what is the label for what this steam plant transfer falls under. we can't call it a partnership when one entity ends up taking over ownership. That is privatization shrouded under a nice PPP label. But so that's an example. What if the city government had approached the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde or other representative organizations of displaced people of Eugene and said, we are gifting away some land. Every year, Eugene has the Riverfront Festival where they acknowledge the Kalapuyan people and how important the river was to them. And so, that just makes it all the more pointed to me that here we are gifting away riverfront property to four white men, who already tried to steal Kesey Square. Actually, I think only 3 of the particular 4 tried to steal Kesey Square.
Yeah.
That's just an example of what some possibilities under this extremely broad label of decolonization could be.
I think that is a better answer than I could have ever hoped for.
Okay, yeah.
If people, we all have our own particular view of the world, and I love videos and YouTube and stuff. So my assumption was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do really well because I have a big YouTube presence, and I actually don't think that's going to happen. But because people are looking at who's on their ballot and trying to learn, like, who are these people, not just on paper. I figured they'll go on to some of those social media sites and video sharing sites. But if people search Zondie Zinke on YouTube, they will find you giving an impassioned plea to some news reporters about basically what you were saying then, but particularly about homeless people being evicted from an area, and talking about Eugene's 1% being Gordon Obie and another person who...
Casey Barrett. Brian Obie and Casey Barrett. Brian Obie, the former mayor, yeah.
Yep. And so I thought that was really powerful, and I was like, man, like, Zondie Zinke's got it, whatever it is, you've got it. But you used a phrase that I really liked. I speak in paragraphs, so it's kind of like I'm asking you questions, but it's kind of like we're just going back and forth, right?
I love it.
And you used a phrase that you said real discussion, and with indigenous rights and honoring Kalapuya Ilihi that we live on now. I think that if there are elements where people who are more privileged, I have certain privileges, you have certain privileges, will kind of performatively give lip service to Native peoples and First Nations peoples, and I think that if we're going to be progressive, you have to continue to make progress. And it is progress that in many, sometimes government functions, but more likely activist circles will begin any kind of an event by saying, we acknowledge that this is taking place on historically the Kalapuya Ilihi, or the land that was operated by whatever regional native tribes that you're in. But real discussion is about continuing to move forward. If we acknowledge that every time because it makes us feel good and it kind of strokes our ego and makes us feel like it's valid to now do whatever we were going to do, that is one step. But I believe that one thing that a Eugene mayor should do is be able to lead like events that are educational, that are discussion based, and that's been a big part of what I have sort of fought for too. Because and I think that I say that because I think you could be able to. Obviously, we want to lift up voices of people who are of that identity, and give them opportunities if they want those opportunities. I think that either you or I would do that. But like talking about the power of a mayor of a city with a weak mayor system like we have, right? We do not have a strong mayor system. The mayor does not hire the city staff. The mayor basically guides the city council, who hires the city manager, who has the most executive authority. And then we don't get to elect that person. It's basically structured so the people are far away from that decision, right?
Yep.
But one thing that the mayor does have the power to do is just be a vocal, outspoken leader. So like, I have a background in music, so I want to do intergenerational group singing. I want to get people together and lead like with my guitar or with like people who are better musicians than me and like sing songs together, because at some point we have fallen away. Eugene has fallen away from the ideals that we like to then like talk about when it's election season, like, we've got this unique, like quirky, like community. It's like, we're sitting in the place where I grew up seeing people playing drums and that got kicked out.
It's
They're not
horrible.
allowed to play drums anymore at the Saturday
Unbelievable.
market. And it's like the most
Unbelievable.
the
It's so
very most
depressing.
visible and impactful like celebration of what community is, and you're getting rid of it, and it's so fucked up. So I don't know, like we've talked about this a bit, but like as mayor, like as a spiritual leader of the community, what would you do? What would you try to do to bring people together?
Yeah, that's interesting. As a spiritual leader of the community, I guess first of all, I love your idea of bringing people together. I think that I'm aware that, and I know you're aware too, that Sunrise always involves music.
Yeah.
In their meetings, and I think that that's really tremendous. And when you were
love
talking,
that.
when you were talking about a drum circle and and how the drum circle and how it was kicked out, I mean, I really, I experienced it.
I'm surprised we haven't been kicked out here.
I know.
County sheriff pulled up right behind my car, hung there for a little bit.
Yeah.
I just chilled.
Yeah, because I mean, it's funny. I have done a lot of what would you say? I don't know, psychotherapy. Individual therapist work in my life, and it took a long time to really for me to see the legitimacy of somatic work. So
Nice.
because I can be a bit of an intellectual person, and a drum circle is hugely healing, and so. I think that, it's a form of decolonization, actually, to move away from these, from the decorum that we have or how we perceive of what we perceive of as decorum. And so I think I would put you on anything, but I would ask you to serve on a committee to answer your own question. Because I think that, I truly think like bring music, these things are... it's actually, really amazing and moving to me to consider, what do you say, the non-explicit ways or that you are bringing resilience to community.
I think that you reflected a lot of what executive leadership is about, which is about putting people in the right positions and making the right connections and delegating tasks, frankly, when you're not the expert of whatever it is that you believe should be done, but you have the ability to empower other people to do that. And one thing that you've done with the Solidarity platform is I want to give you a chance to talk about, so we got Leah Williams, right? That's his name. And
Yep.
Candace King running in Ward 1. And we've got Benjamin Ricker and yourself and Stacey Westover running in the Eugene mayoral race. As I go over to make sure that the phone is still recording, talk about those people and how that came together and how, I've heard you make the argument for why it's good to run multiple candidates in a mayoral race, but could you make that for us now?
Yeah, sure. Well, at the mayoral level, maybe it would be poor strategy if someone like Mike Clark, as you said, someone that would be to the right of Vinny's were running too, and particularly if that person had a robust campaign. But in fact, Vinny's is running to the right of all of us. She is, so there is actually what we need to do is collectively, I really just see this as a collective mission to allow not some non-status quo thinking and action at the higher level of our local government. So what we need to do is collectively, I don't care who it is, we just...
Or write-ins. Write-ins are just as powerful.
Sure. Write in whoever you want to write in. Yeah, they count. So
especially because we do have people who are conservative in Eugene and they voted for Mike Clark, 19,000 of them.
Write in Mike Clark.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Please do, because that Venice is not going to represent you if you have those beliefs. But don't just settle for the person that you think is going to be the most friendly to those. Yeah. Because that's, I don't know.
Yeah. I want to say two things that I watched Thomas's interview with Kitty Piercy, the former mayor Kitty Piercy. I watched it last night. And it was so striking to me that we know the Register Guard gave a weak endorsement. It was explicitly weak endorsement of Mayor Vinny's. And
it was like a sigh, well, since it's going to be her, how are we going to get her to do her job?
And the Eugene Weekly, the only words they put beneath their endorsement of Lucy Vinnie's were actually our names.
Yes.
So they just didn't even write anything at all.
No.
And so
it's amazing. Like they did that for Claire Syrette's race too against Cliff Gray, but isn't that amazing? They couldn't think of anything to say about the race for the top position in our city government.
It really, so I mean, of course, someone with my positions, I don't stand by her, but to see that actually, the people of the establishment are seeing what a weak leader she's been, really stands out. And then when I heard Kitty Piercy on your show, who, as you have acknowledged, has twice endorsed, both the first time anointing her and in this race, endorsed Mayor Lucy Vinnie's, we see that also she really said two things. One, that this that I'm trying to remember correctly.
She said about the council, they need to recognize that they're leaders.
They need to recognize
be energized.
Yeah, the council needs to recognize that they're leader and needs to be energized. And of course, one of the people, I mean, she wasn't explicitly talking about Lucy Vinnie's and their friends and
Yes, they are.
And if she feels that I've misconstrued what she says, she's going to jump on it. But there was opportunity there to speak about what a great job she thought Lucy Vinnie's was doing. She did not do that and then instead chose to talk about, the council could, it needs leadership.
Yes.
So who might lead the council? We could ask. Us mayoral candidates could ask who might lead the council.
Yeah.
And in fact, Kitty Piercy was asking that last night.
Yes.
But
it is pretty amazing. Yeah. And I said that I think she said those things. She definitely said those things because I captioned the whole thing and that took days.
Yes, I know. And I have to say one thing I really appreciate, I knew that Thomas had worked hard to caption it. I actually thought the sound quality was terrific and didn't need the captioning, but he changed the word alumnus when he was talking about about Kitty Piercy, former Mayor Kitty Piercy, to alumna. Yeah. And I just appreciated that so much.
I had to look at it on the fly. I said alumnus accidentally, but yes, I was incorrect about that. Well, thank you for that. So that's such detailed watching, and it's great. Gosh, it's so true though, because the council and the mayor too, like the way that they function, it's been really interesting to watch. Like, okay, let's say I was really long-standing friends with Lucy and I saw that she was the mayor. Now that she's the mayor, I want to believe really strongly that she's doing a really good job, and I want to be able to, she's not a very active web person, web presence person. But a lot of people, if you're the mayor of, a small city, people are going to make a lot of critiques of you. And so a lot of her sort of surrogates will respond to those critiques, right? And those responses have been, to me, so weak in many cases, because one of the biggest things that they'll say is, people will get upset that, we're not seeing a lot of leadership here on this issue. Or, one thing you and I agreed about was that, there was uncertainty about whether two major track events were going to happen at the giant construction that they've got over there on the campus. Ultimately the Olympic trials were postponed, and then it looks like the 2021 games are also postponed. But I would have just appreciated as a citizen, as a person, to have the mayor come out and assuage some of those fears. But I think that, she's very much in the pocket of I'm not going to upset the people that are running that, because she's been all for it. And this is really good for the businesses and the economic development of Eugene. But I guess my point is that one of the biggest things people will say is, and I talked about this on the Spent the Rent podcast with Patty Rose, is that the mayor doesn't have any power. Why are you so upset at her? You should be talking to the city councilors. You should talk to the city council. It's bullshit. Yeah. The mayor's the leader of the city council.
Yeah. And let me say, here's just one example. City staff, when they were proposing the CET ordinance, and I didn't even touch on this I haven't touched on this publicly in any of my campaigning yet. The city staff, one of the top city staff, Denny Bod, had put in the draft ordinance a max tax, so a cap on the tax, so that no entity would pay over $1 million. The that is absurd because what that means is that the largest projects end up paying a lower percentage than the smaller projects, right? Than the under.
Regressive.
Right? And so Emily Semple said, why do we have cap on the tax? And Denny Bod said, well, it's a reasonability test. I mean, I quote that. He said, it's a reasonableness test. And Emily might have said, what do you mean by that? Or he might have just mumbled through knowing that didn't sound too reasonable. And he said, well, it's just kind of unreasonable that any single entity would pay more than $1 million. Lucy Vinnies didn't say a word. And that cap
that is so
made it all the way months and months and months, maybe, 6 months later, to when the ordinance was on the table to be voted on. And Emily Semple sort of traded her vote to get rid of that. This is how she framed it sort of publicly. She traded the vote. So if they would get rid of that cap, she would vote for this completely whittled value to the CET. I mean, it's actually a terrible trade or whatever. But and it's gross that she would get to the point of having to make that trade. It is gross that Vinnies, since I'm running for mayor, I'll focus on Mayor Vinnies.
It's been so great because I was like, for a long time, people were like, well, you're so mad at this person. So I kind of eased off the gas pedal. But someone needs to say what's going on.
Oh, okay.
And so you've been doing that, and I'm just sitting back like,
I would love the
popcorn
opportunity.
in my mouth, like, hell yes.
I would love the opportunity to say a few things because, if I were in that room, I would, maybe, I don't know if I'd say it in that room or maybe I'd go with the decorum and call a private meeting and say, no staff should ever bring such bullshit back into this room. We represent the people and not the special interests. You're representing the 1% there, and that's disgusting, and don't do it again. Right? I mean, I don't know. So maybe that's all the power I have to just, do that. But that's, and then I would bring it public. And so I, would make sure that the public knew that we, had this done, perpetrated by our staff. And, maybe that speaks to, the weak mayor system that you're talking about, but that is not okay. And that's just one example. Time and time again, I've seen her not speak up where she needs to, and I've seen the reverse. In her State of the City speech, she said homelessness is closely tied to public safety, and then proceeded to talk about how Eugene has been under-policed. Okay? That, it is... you're going to be overblown anytime you compare pretty much anyone to Donald Trump. So, but the truth is, right, he talked about...
I would say that there are many cases in which Donald Trump has exhibited more leadership than Lucy Vinnies. Okay. And I'm more than willing to say that as a statement.
There you go. So. There you go. Yeah. And so we know how he talked about people across the border. And that's disgusting. She is promoting a mythology against, some of the most vulnerable, marginalized people in our community. And then we see that it's in part because of the city's failure to provide baseline provisions and even sanction places for unhoused people to go. Hello. Sorry, we're recording, but I'm just saying.
Would you like to come into the shot? We are filming, and sorry for the audio listeners, but this is the beauty of Eugene.
We're also social distancing, so we can't be so close.
Right, of course. Sorry. Oh, I've seen this gentleman before. Yes, you are. Well, it's a totally unedited show, and so the only way I can edit you right now out is to say that I'm sorry, we're going to have to keep going with our conversation.
Naruhito, number one.
Naruhito, number one. And? I didn't hear that. This guy knows a little bit of Japanese, though. It's great. All right, thank you, sir. We're going to proceed with our interview.
Can I say one last thing?
No, sorry.
My favorite book is The Hagakori.
All right,
okay,
thank you.
So
I chatted with that guy yesterday.
Oh yeah, he seemed to know it. So what was I going to say? So then the business community they're becoming vigilantes, saying there's the Wake Up Eugene, right? So the founder of Wake Up Eugene, Stephen Sheehan, in his founding video, he says, I might not get this exactly right, but it's close enough, that I'm fitting to choke out a transient right now. Okay? So, I understand he just seen some destruction happen to his restaurant. He was upset. Maybe he was on a rant. I still don't think it's cool, but okay, I understand, when people go off, they go off. he could have taken that down, or any of the 1,000 followers he had could have said, hey, we want to, do some problem solving with you, but take that hate speech down. No, that didn't happen. And you know what our mayor did? She says, she calls him a victim when some protesters had gone into his restaurant, right, and basically stated
Mike Clark called it an assault.
Right,
and then Venice basically uncritically agreed with everything that he said.
Uncritically agreed, and basically said he had been victimized. This man had been victimized
again. They were saying house
keys,
not handcuffs.
House keys, not handcuffs. Exactly.
To me, the word assault...
a little bit rough, right? But he had been victimized again because the district attorney had found that those protesters couldn't be prosecuted. I mean... So she is stretching so far. I mean, to me, you can compare that to Trump's comments on Charlottesville. It's just, he's got hate speech on one hand. They've got love speech on the other hand, right? And, and she's basically saying because they followed the letter of the law, and so it's just, I really can't even comprehend her. And you know what? I really am not looking to promote a divide between the business community and the unhoused community, or between Wake Up Eugene and Houses Not Handcuffs, or any of that. Right. But because you know what? It is the government's responsibility to allocate their budget such that people's baseline needs are met, and we wouldn't be running into this this categorical hate.
I think that's, I mean. So I used to run a big social media platform in college, and it was where I got my start with interviewing people, and it's called Humans of Carlton. It probably didn't have, it had a lot of traffic back in the day. Who get like 400, 500 likes on a post and a lot of comments, and relatively apolitical, but still had a bit of a lens to it, as everything does that humans do. And I guess, so my thing with Eugene Wake Up in this discussion is that one of the things that's so troubling about their platform is that they don't seem to do much about the stuff that is explicitly hate speech, like what you're saying. If I am to assume, and in many cases I do assume this, that there's a noble intention to some of the things that they do and they post, they disrupt their own credibility, because often they will say things like, we're not opposed to homelessness, we're opposed to lawlessness. And if that was consistently true across every post and across what the conversation, the dialogue that they're curating, then that would be one thing. But often the page, I've heard them refer to people as bums, and like disparaging bums, and someone just yesterday, today's May 3rd, so on May 2nd, there was an article posted about how the the area where West 11th, or that area, 6th and 7th, across past Chambers, that camp is being told they have to leave by Monday, and then somebody commented like, oh, we're gonna need bigger roach traps, so it's like there's this really it is hateful, it is dehumanizing, and it's cruel dialogue that once you allow that kind of stuff, it only festers, it only snowballs. And so if they had leadership that really believed strongly in loving the homeless, which they kind of try to talk about also, that would be one thing. That we haven't had the mayor call that out is, to me, it hurts the whole community. I want to say also that this was the other thing that Kitty Piercy said in talking with you. She said, when she was talking about the lack of leadership in our with our incumbents, is all of them, is that she said, I really think you can just have a camp in every ward. Neighborhood or ward, right? I have sat down with city staff and with Emily Semple and the city staff specifically working on rest stops and safe spots and the unhoused issue, as they call it. And, it was so clear to me that you could just say to all the neighborhood associations, you say, listen, every
neighborhood is going to have a designated rest stop. We will give you this amount of time to choose your location, and if you don't choose it, the government will choose it for you. If there's a problem, we could look at moving the rest stop, but this is how you hold a line with people, right? That's leadership, to say, okay, we want to give you choice, but we are not going to continue to have people having no place to go, right? They have kicked the can on this for years and years and years. And I mean, do they, it's like do they not have any sense of how to hold a line, right? Or do they not want to, or is it they don't have the will?
I think it's much more that they don't have the will.
Okay, yes, sure.
And, optically, too, our current mayor, I'm not going to disparage people based on where they live, but, she lives out on West 34th, which is in the South Hills, and it's like, okay, if you want to look really historically at we both have connections to Columbia University, which is on a big hill, and that's not a Georgetown University, is on a big hill, and Columbia overlooks Harlem, and it's like, I'm looking down on you, right? But also a big reason why historically those things are where more well-off people lived is because it's harder to get to, and it's harder to congregate around, and so there is privilege in living in a place where you're not in close contact with people who are unhoused. And so the deep hypocrisy there has been that it doesn't tend to affect her in her daily life, but she's more than willing to make it so that only Bethel and Train Song and, like West Eugene are, providing services for this community of people. And so there's deep classism in what's going on. Classism is not progressive.
Yeah.
If you for me, progressivism, the very first thing should be about resources and class and economics. Everything else, the other identities are important as well. But gosh.
Yeah, so I want to relate this to city policy
Please
around affordable housing. The policy is affordability at every level, and basically the government in some way subsidizing affordability at every level.
Okay.
That is an absurd thing to say. This is why. Someone who can afford housing at this level can afford it at this level, right? Someone who can afford it at this level can afford it at this level. The city statistics...
you wouldn't have affordable Snickers bars for every level.
I mean, basically, what I know. I mean, basically...
Someone who's rich can afford a lot of Snickers bars.
I can't deal with them talking about equity and affordability at every level. I mean, that is an absurd, construct.
Yeah.
And so if we think about...
low-income housing, as opposed to affordable
subsidized
housing.
low-income housing, and then if you need more of it because people can't, then they can come and have this housing. But the thing is, I mean, what they're really talking about. Well, first of all, let me share the city statistics.
Sure.
They have this in their missing quote unquote missing middle graphic. Mm-hmm. They show for people who can pay. I think it's under. I can't remember. It's under 1,000 or 100. It's under 100. People who can pay under $625 a month. There is a 13,000 unit shortage in Eugene. Then you get to people who can pay up to $875 and then $1,250. And they actually say there's some surpluses, just like little bit of surplus in each of those. And then you get to something that's just, I think it goes where you get to then just under paying just under $2,000 a month. And then they say there's about I think it's a $3,000 unit shortage. Mm-hmm. But that's an absurd graph, because if people can afford, $1,900 a month, they can also afford $1,500 a month.
Sure.
So what it is it's and what they're talking about is basically subsidizing private developers so that private developers can charge, put in, a granite countertops as opposed to linoleum countertops or whatever goes on a countertop. And then they can charge, $1,900. So It's a play into classism at the same time as they're talking about equity, and they're doing it with public dollars.
Absolutely. Are there any other things? We're at over an hour, and as I love long form podcasts, but I'm not famous yet. When I'm famous,
I'm not famous yet either.
Yeah, exactly. But we will be. at least in hopefully in the world of municipal Eugene politics. So I recognize that people's attention span is not like, oh, I'm really going to sit through this 2 hours of content when they have YouTube and, Hulu and Netflix right next to them as well. Are there things that we haven't been able to chat about yet that you want to get out there? Because this is your chance.
No, I really appreciate. No. I think we've covered it. I mean,
Good.
We could do a total reverse at some point.
Well, I don't want to. I think hopefully people who are really just curious voters with the time they have. I don't want to presume people have a lot of time because of COVID-19, but in many cases people have more time at home in front of screens or driving. You can listen to the podcast and listen to Matthew Yuke's episode, Robert Patterson's episode, Zondie Zinke here. And I have to ask you, though, the final question. What's one way that we could all be a little less stupid?
One way we could all be a little less stupid. I really think just like, I don't know, look up or look at decolonization, or like if you're already down with decolonization, do something that where you're engaging in the decolonizing your mind or behaviors or the community around you in some way. But I just think that's a way of opening one's mind, I think. And then I would just say if basically I have lots and lots of breakdown on my page, which you get to. I have my own page on the Solidarity Platform Eugene page, which is solidarityplatformeugene.org. Or anyone can call me or 650-743-8588. And again, I just really encourage people to, in the primary, choose someone other than Mayor Vinny's, and then you can have your choice.
Yeah, you'll get her on your November ballot regardless.
Exactly.
That's like impossible that we would overcome all the conventional, like I went on Yahoo Mail and Lucy Vinnis on the side, advertising that I'm not paying for.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, before I just totally wrap up, I love what you said. We don't want to mix up the Solidarity Platform, which is a standalone entity, with ESSN or SAN's Solidarity Action Network or Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network, although they have done a pretty outstanding job of providing forums that are, I guess, a little similar to this in that they're both on YouTube and with candidates and about 40 minutes long, but are more explicitly, like, they ask the same questions to all the people, and I was on there, she was on there, and so just please dive into this race. But also, I just want to say, like, when you brought up decolonization and what it means, I'm reminded of Diane Downey, who was an amazing high school teacher I had, who was a literature teacher. And on the very last day of our senior year of high school, she was thinking about what message she wanted to deliver to us. And she basically had drawn like what looked like a ladder on the whiteboard, or a staircase rather. And she basically said, whatever you do in life, you're going to want to get up here, but you don't have to do it in a way by taking jobs, by doing things that step on these other people, where you have to step on these people to get up higher, because that's not what you should do. And I thought that was beautiful, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, it is. And you're reminding me because
that's what the colonial attitude is.
Yes, and I mean, we can also decolonize language. You're reminding me because I used to teach and
I'm
write
in front of a Ronald Reagan quote. Let's decolonize the shit out of that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I mean, I didn't get to say this city is entrenched in trickle-down economics. The city policy is entrenched in trickle-down economics, and we got to expose that. But the other thing I was just going to say, because I used to teach, and you're reminding me of writing on the blackboard, and I would just give just a brief lesson on paying attention to language. I mean, we talk. I hate this word. We talk about slaves, right? There are enslavers, and there, I guess, are enslaved people. But there is no such thing as a slave, right? So
yes,
that
does not, and the lexicon, the language we use, our vocabulary matters so much, because we think in language, we dream in language. So if I believe that I'm a slave, am I going to resist? Am I going to rebel? Absolutely not. This has been a great conversation, and when one of us is the mayor, We'll chat again about how the other one is doing and living up to
And
sticking with the
I
people.
will be so 100% behind Thomas if we get him to break through.
I hope so, but that's really kind, and that's been indicative of your whole role in this. Has been that it's never been about you. For me, it started out being a lot about me, and now I'm like I'm inspired by you, and I'm with everybody. Teasing.
I was wary of you, and now I'm tight with you, so
It's
I'm
good.
promoting you.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you very much, and thanks everybody for checking out the show. Take care.